The first insult hit her at 6:47 in the morning. Myrtle Bellamy sat on the same splintered bench she had claimed for 11 years, her fingers wrapped around a wooden cane worn smooth by time. The early sun pushed through the haze, casting the park in that strange golden light that made even the scattered trash look almost beautiful. Crumpled fast food wrappers, crushed soda cans, a single child's shoe, abandoned near the rusted swing set. She watched 3 officers cross the cracked pavement toward the playground, their boots crunching on broken glass. The one in front walked with his chest pushed out, arms swinging wide like he owned every inch of ground beneath him. His badge caught the light. The name etched into it was Sanchez. The 2 officers behind him laughed at something he said. Their laughter bounced off the empty basketball courts, sharp and careless. One of them pointed at a man sleeping under newspapers near the water fountain. The man did not stir. Myrtle pulled her olive coat tighter. The fabric had been washed so many times it felt like paper against her skin. Beneath it, she wore layers of tan cloth, frayed at the edges but clean. Always clean. That was the one thing she never let go. A jogger passed the bench without looking at her. Then a woman walking a small dog. The dog strained toward Myrtle, curious, but the woman yanked the leash and quickened her pace. This was how it always went. People moved around her like water around a stone, never stopping, never seeing. If you are listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I would not even reach 10,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these stories do matter. The officers stopped near the fountain. Sanchez nudged the sleeping man with his boot. Not a kick, but not gentle either. The man jolted awake, newspapers scattering around him like startled birds. Move it along, buddy. Sanchez's voice carried across the park. This ain't a hotel. The man scrambled to his feet, grabbing his belongings in shaking hands. He mumbled something that might have been an apology, then shuffled toward the street, head down, shoulders hunched. The 2 officers behind Sanchez exchanged grins. Myrtle's eyes tracked every movement. She had seen this ritual 100 times. The approach. The intimidation. The quiet humiliation dressed up as law enforcement. Her grip tightened on her cane, knuckles turning white beneath skin that had grown thin with age. A pigeon landed near her feet, pecking at a stale bread crust she had dropped earlier. She watched it eat, her face revealing nothing. But her mind was cataloging. Dates. Names. Every interaction she witnessed went into a mental ledger that stretched back years. The officers began walking her direction. Her heartbeat remained steady. She had learned long ago that fear was a luxury she could not afford. Fear made you small. Fear made you invisible in the worst way, the kind of invisible where people felt permitted to treat you like garbage. She was already invisible in a different way. The kind where people assumed they knew everything about her just by looking. Homeless. Worthless. 3 words that followed her like shadows. The morning light shifted as clouds rolled across the sun. For a moment, the park grew darker, the golden glow fading to gray. Myrtle lifted her face toward the sky, feeling the cool air against her weathered cheeks. Somewhere in the distance, a car alarm wailed briefly, then stopped. The 3 officers passed within 10 feet of her bench. One of them, the younger one with the clean shave and eager eyes, glanced at her. She met his gaze directly, and he looked away fast, like he had accidentally made eye contact with something unpleasant. Sanchez did not even turn his head. To him, she was not worth the effort of acknowledgement. She was furniture. Background noise. A problem that would eventually solve itself through neglect. They stopped near the park entrance, huddling together. Voices low. One of them laughed again, and then Myrtle caught fragments of conversation floating back to her on the morning breeze. Clean this place up. Mayor wants results. About time. Her fingers found the inner pocket of her coat, brushing against something hard and rectangular. An old flip phone, its screen cracked, its edges worn. She had carried it for 3 years without using it. The battery stayed charged. The number programmed into it stayed current. Some weapons only needed to be fired once. The officers dispersed, heading to their patrol cars parked along the curb. Engines started. Doors slammed. Within minutes, the park returned to its usual quiet, populated only by pigeons and the distant hum of traffic. But Myrtle did not relax. She had heard enough. They were coming for her. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But soon. The word cleanup meant sweeps. It meant officers rousting everyone who lived on these benches and these corners, pushing them somewhere else, anywhere else, as long as it was out of sight. She had survived 6 sweeps in 11 years. Each time, she found her way back to this exact bench. Each time, the officers eventually forgot about her, distracted by newer problems, louder complaints. This time felt different. An elderly man in a torn jacket approached from the far side of the park, pushing a shopping cart filled with aluminum cans. Gerald. He had been here almost as long as she had. He raised one hand in a small wave and she nodded back. Heard them talking, he said as he drew closer. His voice was rough, damaged by decades of cigarettes and cold nights. Sanchez is in charge of it this time. Myrtle's expression did not change, but something shifted in her eyes. Gerald noticed. He had known her long enough to read the small signs. That man enjoys this, Gerald continued, parking his cart near the bench. Saw him last month put his hands on Curtis. Just grabbed him by the collar and threw him off the bench. Curtis is 72 years old. I know. You gonna be okay when they come? Myrtle looked at him. Really looked at him. Gerald was one of the few people in this park who ever asked that question. Most of the others had stopped expecting kindness so long ago that they had forgotten how to offer it. I'll be fine, she said. He studied her face, then nodded slowly. You always say that. And you always are. Still don't know how. He pushed his cart toward the recycling bins near the basketball court, metal cans clinking against each other like wind chimes. Myrtle watched him go, then turned her attention back to the street where the patrol cars had been. One car remained. Engine idling. Sanchez sat behind the wheel, his face visible through the windshield. He was looking at something on his phone, thumb scrolling, jaw working on a piece of gum. Then he looked up. His eyes found her bench. Found her sitting there, watching him. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The distance between them was maybe 50 yards, but it felt smaller. Like the space was compressing, drawing them toward an inevitable collision. Sanchez smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile that said he had just added something to his list. The patrol car pulled away from the curb and disappeared around the corner. Myrtle sat perfectly still, her hand resting on the cane, her breathing slow and even. The pigeon at her feet finished the bread crust and flew away, wings beating against the morning air. She had seen that smile before. On different faces, in different places, across more years than she cared to count. It was the smile of a man who believed he held all the power. She knew something he did not. And somewhere in this city, there was a phone number that knew it too. What do you think Myrtle is hiding? And why has she stayed on that bench for 11 years when she clearly has another choice? Let me know in the comments. Officer Derek Sanchez pulled into the precinct parking lot at 8:15, still thinking about the old woman on the bench. Something about the way she had looked at him bothered him. Not scared. Not even nervous. She had stared at him like she was memorizing his face for later use. Like she was filing him away in some mental cabinet. Ridiculous. She was just another vagrant. One more in a city full of them. He killed the engine and sat in the cruiser for a moment, scrolling through messages on his phone. His wife wanted him to pick up milk. His brother wanted to borrow money again. His captain wanted a progress report on the park cleanup initiative. 3 years on homeless detail had taught him that the job was less about helping people and more about managing complaints. Business owners called when someone slept too close to their storefront. Residents called when they saw needles in the grass near playgrounds. Politicians called when election season approached and they needed to show they were tough on visible poverty. Nobody ever asked where these people were supposed to go. That was not his problem to solve. He climbed out of the cruiser and walked toward the building, passing 2 other officers heading in the opposite direction. Hey, Sanchez, one of them called. Heard you're leading the sweep next week. That's right. Better you than me. Last time I did one of those, some guy threw a bottle at my head. Sanchez shrugged. They throw a bottle, they go to jail. Simple math. The other officer laughed and kept walking. Sanchez pushed through the precinct doors, nodding at the desk sergeant as he passed. The bullpen was busy for a Tuesday morning. Officers typed reports, made phone calls, complained about coffee. Sanchez dropped into his chair and woke up his computer, preparing to file the morning's activity logs. His partner, Tommy Lou, rolled his chair over from the adjacent desk. "You look distracted." "I'm fine." "That old lady from the park get to you?" Sanchez stopped typing. "What are you talking about?" Tommy grinned. "Ramirez told me. Said you were staring her down like she owed you money." "I wasn't staring her down. I was observing a potential subject." "A potential subject." "Right." Tommy leaned back, hands behind his head. "She's been on that bench since before I joined the force. Harmless. Everyone says that until they're not." "What's she gonna do, Derek? Beat you with her cane?" Sanchez did not laugh. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but his mind was elsewhere. 11 years on that bench. That was what people said. 11 years in the same spot, through rain and snow and heat waves and everything else this city threw at its forgotten citizens. Normal homeless moved around. They followed resources. Shelters in winter, soup kitchens on specific days, different corners depending on foot traffic and generosity. Staying in one place for over a decade required either extreme stubbornness or a reason nobody had figured out yet. "What do we actually know about her?" Sanchez asked. Tommy raised an eyebrow. "You serious? Humor me." "Okay." Tommy thought for a moment. "Name's Myrtle Bellamy. At least that's what she tells people. No one's ever run her ID as far as I know. She's polite, keeps to herself, never causes problems. Some of the guys have tried moving her along before, but she always ends up back on that same bench. Eventually everyone just stopped bothering." "Everyone stopped bothering," Sanchez repeated. "That's great police work. Come on. She's like 80 years old. What do you want us to do, arrest her for sitting?" "There are vagrancy ordinances, which no DA in this city would prosecute. You know that." Sanchez did know that. It was one of the things that frustrated him most about this assignment. All these laws on the books, but no one with the spine to enforce them. The result was chaos dressed up as compassion. Streets that smelled like urine. Parks that families avoided. A city slowly surrendering public space to anyone willing to claim it. He turned back to his computer and started typing. Activity log for the morning patrol. 3 subjects contacted. 1 relocated. 0 arrests. Same as always. But his mind kept circling back to her. To that stare. Around noon, he drove back to the park for another pass. Protocol required regular visibility in cleanup zones. That was his justification. It had nothing to do with the old woman. The park was busier now. A few kids on the swings, parents watching from nearby benches. A group of teenagers tossing a football near the basketball courts. Normal life happening in the spaces between decay. Myrtle was still on her bench. Same position. Same posture. Like she had not moved an inch in the 5 hours since he last saw her. Sanchez parked the cruiser and got out, walking a slow loop around the park's perimeter. He acknowledged the parents with brief nods. He ignored the teenagers. When he completed the loop, he found himself standing maybe 20 feet from her bench. She was watching him. Not casually. Not with the darting eyes of someone who feared authority. She watched him the way a bird watches a cat. Steady. Calculating. Tracking his movements with unsettling precision. He walked toward her. "Afternoon." She did not respond. Just looked at him with those pale blue eyes, faded by age but sharp with something he could not name. "You've been here a while," he said. "Maybe time to move along." "I'm not bothering anyone." "You're bothering me." The words came out harsher than he intended. Or maybe exactly as harsh as he intended. Sometimes he could not tell the difference anymore. She tilted her head slightly. A small gesture, almost curious. "And why is that, officer?" Nobody talked to him like that. Not suspects. Not witnesses. Not even other cops. There was a challenge in her voice, buried under the rasp of age. "Because this is a public park. And the public doesn't want to look at He gestured vaguely at her. At the cart. At the layers of old clothing. At everything she represented. At what? She asked quietly. He did not answer. Instead, he looked around the park at the families pretending not to watch this exchange, at the teenagers who had stopped throwing their football. "I'll be back," he said finally. "And when I come back, I expect you to be somewhere else." He turned and walked to his cruiser without looking back. He told himself he had made his point. He told himself she would comply like all the others eventually did. But as he drove away, he glanced in the rearview mirror. She was still watching him. And for the first time in 3 years on this detail, Derek Sanchez felt like he was the one being hunted. He pushed the feeling down, buried it under paperwork and routine and the comfortable certainty of his badge. But it did not go away. That night, lying in bed next to his sleeping wife, he stared at the ceiling and thought about tomorrow. The old woman would still be there. He was sure of it. This time he would not just talk. This time he would remove her himself. The sun had barely cleared the buildings when Sanchez arrived at the park the next morning. His cruiser door slammed like a gunshot in the quiet air. 2 other officers followed in a separate vehicle, parking along the curb. Ramirez and Webb. Backup he had requested specifically because he wanted witnesses. Witnesses to his authority. Witnesses to compliance. Myrtle sat on her bench, a paper cup of coffee steaming in her weathered hands. Where she got the coffee he did not know. It irritated him that she had coffee while he had skipped his own this morning in his rush to get here early. She did not look up as the 3 officers approached. She watched a squirrel chase another squirrel up an oak tree near the playground, her expression calm, almost peaceful. "Good morning, Derek." Sanchez stopped mid-stride. The other 2 officers exchanged glances behind him. "What did you call me?" Now she looked at him. That same steady gaze from yesterday. Those faded blue eyes that seemed to see straight through his uniform to something underneath. "Derek, that is your name, isn't it?" His jaw tightened. "How do you know my first name?" "I know a lot of things." Ramirez shifted his weight, uncomfortable. Webb coughed into his fist. Sanchez closed the remaining distance between them, standing over her in a way that forced her to crane her neck to see his face. The position was deliberate. Dominance through physical space. Training 101. "Let me explain how this works," he said slowly. "I give an order. You follow it. That's the arrangement." "And what is your order?" "Leave. Don't come back." Myrtle took a slow sip of her coffee. The sound of her swallowing seemed impossibly loud in the morning stillness. "And if I don't?" "Then I arrest you for trespassing. This is a public park, which you're treating as a residence. That's a violation of City Ordinance 14-23. You looked that up just for me." "I'm flattered." Webb laughed before he could stop himself. Sanchez shot him a look that killed the sound instantly. "I'm giving you a chance," Sanchez said, turning back to Myrtle. "Most people don't get that from me." "I appreciate your generosity." There was no sarcasm in her voice. No mockery. Just a flat statement of fact delivered with the calm of someone who had faced worse than a police officer with something to prove. Sanchez felt heat rising in his chest. This was not how these encounters went. People argued, sure. They complained. They cursed. But eventually they moved. Eventually they submitted to the reality that he had power and they did not. This woman acted like the badge meant nothing. "Stand up." She did not move. "I said stand up." "Why?" "Because I told you to." "That isn't a reason. That's a repetition." His hand moved toward the cuffs on his belt before he consciously decided to reach for them. Ramirez took a half step forward, then stopped, unsure whether to intervene. "Derek." Her voice cut through his anger like cold water. "I'm going to say this once, and I want you to listen carefully. You don't get to tell me what to do. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm giving you information." She set her coffee cup on the bench beside her, freeing her hands. "You have a choice right now. You can walk away from this bench, get in your car, and continue with your day. Or you can keep pushing. But if you keep pushing, I will make a phone call. And you do not want me to make that phone call." Sanchez laughed. The sound was loud and harsh, meant to show his fellow officers that this threat meant nothing. But the laugh felt hollow even to his own ears. A phone call. That's your big move? Who are you going to call, Grandma? The mayor? The president? Someone who will answer. Right. He unclipped the cuffs from his belt. I've heard enough. You're under arrest for refusing a lawful order from a police officer. I've refused nothing. You asked me to stand. You didn't order me to leave. I'm ordering you now. No. You're threatening me now. There's a difference. And there are witnesses. She gestured with her chin toward the far end of the park. Sanchez turned. A woman with a smartphone stood near the playground, her camera aimed directly at him. A man on a bicycle had stopped on the path, watching. Two teenage girls sat on a nearby bench, one of them already typing on her phone. When had they arrived? How had he not noticed? Everyone has a camera these days, Myrtle said softly. Everyone is always watching. The question is whether you want to be watched doing something you can't take back. Sanchez's grip on the cuffs tightened until his knuckles ached. His face felt hot. His heart pounded against his ribs. This isn't over, he said. I know. I'm coming back. And next time, there won't be any warnings. Myrtle picked up her coffee cup and took another sip. Steam rose between them like a veil. I'll be here, Derek. I've been here for 11 years. I'll be here tomorrow. And the day after. And every day until one of us decides this isn't worth it anymore. He wanted to grab her. To drag her off that bench and throw her in the back of his cruiser. To show everyone watching that he was in control, that his authority was absolute, that a homeless old woman did not get to speak to him like an equal. But the cameras were watching. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that there was something wrong here. Something he was missing. He clipped the cuffs back onto his belt. Turned without another word. Walked back to his cruiser with Ramirez and Webb following in confused silence. As he reached for the door handle, her voice drifted across the park one final time. Don't make me call them, Derek. You wouldn't like what happens next. He got in the car, slammed the door, pulled away from the curb fast enough to make the tires bark against the pavement. His hands were shaking. And for the first time since he pinned on his badge, Derek Sanchez had no idea what to do next. 26 hours passed before Sanchez returned to the park. He told himself he needed time to plan, to strategize, to approach this situation with the professionalism his training demanded. But the truth was simpler. He was afraid. Not of her. That was ridiculous. She was old. Frail. She sat on a bench holding a cane and drinking coffee. There was nothing to fear from a woman like that. But the fear was there anyway, lodged in his chest like a splinter he could not reach. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold. A front had moved through overnight, dropping the temperature 20 degrees and filling the sky with thick clouds that threatened rain. Perfect weather for what he had planned. He parked 3 blocks away this time. No cruiser. No uniform. Just jeans and a hoodie and the kind of anonymous face that blended into any crowd. His badge and gun stayed locked in his glove compartment. If this was going to happen, it would happen without witnesses. Without cameras. Without anything that could come back to haunt him later. The park was nearly empty when he arrived on foot. The cold had driven away the families. The playground stood deserted, swings moving slightly in the wind. Even the pigeons had found somewhere else to be. Myrtle sat on her bench. Of course she did. He approached from behind, using the oak trees near the basketball court as cover. His footsteps were silent on the wet grass. The traffic noise from the street would mask any sound he made. When he was 10 feet away, she spoke. You're not as quiet as you think you are. He froze. She did not turn around. Did not look over her shoulder. Just sat there, hands wrapped around her cane, staring straight ahead at the empty playground. I can feel you standing there. The way the air moves. The way the birds went quiet when you got close. Now she turned. Hello again, Derek. He stepped out from behind the tree, abandoning any pretense of stealth. How did you know? Experience. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. He walked around the bench until he stood facing her. Without his uniform, he felt smaller somehow. Less certain. The badge had always been a shield as much as a symbol. "We need to talk," he said. "Then talk. Not here. Somewhere private." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You came without your uniform. Without your car. Without your fellow officers." She paused. "What exactly are you planning, Derek?" "A conversation. A conversation you don't want anyone to see." He did not deny it. There was no point. She had already figured out what he had in mind, probably from the moment she heard him approaching through the trees. "You think I'm just some helpless old woman," she said. "Someone you can intimidate. Someone who will eventually break down and do what you say. Am I right? I think you're someone who's been causing problems for me. I've been sitting on a bench. If that causes you problems, the problem isn't me." His hands curled into fists at his sides. He was not here to debate. He was not here to negotiate. He was here to end this, one way or another. "Get up." She did not move. "I said get up." "Or what? You'll hit me? An unarmed elderly woman? Without witnesses, without backup, without even your badge to hide behind." He took a step closer. Close enough to touch her. Close enough to grab her collar and to drag her off that bench. Close enough to do exactly what she was describing. But he did not. Something in her eyes stopped him. Not fear. Not submission. Something else entirely. Something that looked almost like pity. "You poor man," she said quietly. "You have no idea what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing." "No, you don't." She shifted on the bench, adjusting her grip on her cane. "You came here to scare me. To threaten me. Maybe even to hurt me. You thought if you caught me alone, away from cameras, you could finally prove that you're the one in control." She leaned forward, her face inches from his. "But you're not in control. You never were. And now you've crossed a line that you can't uncross." "What line? I haven't touched you." "You came here with intent. That's enough." Her voice dropped even lower. "I warned you, Derek. I told you not to force my hand. But you couldn't leave it alone. You couldn't accept that some people aren't afraid of you. So what happens now? You call someone?" He laughed, but the sound was thin and brittle. "Go ahead. Call whoever you want. Who's going to believe a homeless old woman over a police officer?" Myrtle's hand moved. Not fast. Not threatening. Just a slow, deliberate motion toward the inside of her coat. Sanchez tensed, suddenly aware of how isolated they were. How far from help. How easy it would be for something to go wrong in a place like this. Her fingers emerged holding a phone. The kind of flip phone that nobody had used in 20 years. "What is that?" "This is what happens now." She opened it. The screen glowed faint blue in the gray morning light. "Who are you calling?" "Someone who's been waiting for your name to come up." His mouth went dry. "What does that mean?" She did not answer. Her thumb moved over the buttons, pressing a sequence she clearly knew by heart. "Wait," he said. "Just wait a second." The phone was already at her ear. "Think about what you're doing. Whatever this is, we can talk about it. We can work something out." She looked at him with those pale blue eyes, and for the first time, he saw something other than calm patience in her expression. He saw satisfaction. "Hello," she said into the phone. "It's Myrtle. I'm ready now. The officer's name is Derek Sanchez. Badge number 7439. His badge number. She knew his badge number. Send them to Jefferson Park. He'll be here." She closed the phone and slipped it back into her coat. "What did you just do?" His voice came out cracked and strange. "Who did you call?" Myrtle smiled. "Have a seat, Derek. They'll be here in about 15 minutes. And I think you're going to want to be sitting down for what comes next." Sanchez did not sit. He paced back and forth across the cracked pavement in front of the bench, his eyes darting between Myrtle and the park entrances. The gray sky pressed down on him like a weight. His breath came in short, visible puffs. "You're going to wear a hole in the ground," Myrtle observed. "Who did you call?" "You already asked that. And you didn't answer." "I answered. You just didn't like what I said." He stopped pacing. His hands were shaking again. He shoved them in his hoodie pockets to hide the tremor. "This is insane. You're insane. Do you know what happens when you file false reports? When you waste law enforcement resources? I can have you arrested for that. You're not in uniform. You don't have your badge. And you came here to intimidate a citizen. She tilted her head. I wonder which one of us would have a harder time explaining ourselves. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. She was right. He had walked into this situation completely exposed, thinking it would give him an advantage. Instead, it had stripped away every protection he normally relied on. Sit down, she said again. You're making me tired just watching you. This time he sat. Not next to her. On the ground, his back against the oak tree, his legs stretched out in front of him. Like a child who had been sent to the corner. Better, Myrtle said. Now we can talk like civilized people. I don't want to talk. I want to know what's happening. What's happening is consequences. Something you should have considered before you decided I was an easy target. He looked at her. Really looked at her for what felt like the first time. The weathered skin. The gray hair hanging in tangled strands. The coat that had seen better decades. The cane resting against her thigh like an old friend. Nothing about her appearance suggested power. Nothing suggested threat. She looked exactly like what everyone assumed she was, a homeless woman who had aged out of relevance. But that phone call. The way she had spoken. The way she had rattled off his badge number without hesitation. The certainty in her voice when she said they would be here in 15 minutes. Who are you? He asked quietly. I'm exactly who I've always been. You just never bothered to find out. That's not an answer. No, she agreed. It's not. But you'll get your answer soon enough. Silence fell between them. The wind picked up, sending dead leaves skittering across the pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked twice and then stopped. Sanchez checked his watch. 8 minutes had passed since the call. This documentation you mentioned, he said. What documentation? Myrtle turned to look at him, something like surprise flickering across her face. You remembered that? I remember everything. Do you? Do you remember Curtis Williams? 72 years old. You grabbed him by the collar and threw him off a bench last month. Dislocated his shoulder. He said nothing. Do you remember Maria Santos? 45. You dumped out her belongings and crushed her reading glasses under your boot. She hadn't done anything except sit in the wrong place at the wrong time. His jaw tightened. Do you remember James Chin? 61. You threatened to arrest his daughter if he didn't leave the park. His daughter is 9 years old and was visiting him for the first time in 2 years. How do you know all this? Because I watched. Because I listened. Because nobody notices an old woman on a bench, so people say things around me they would never say anywhere else. She paused. And because I wrote it all down. Dates. Names. Badge numbers. Every interaction I witnessed for 11 years. His stomach dropped. You've been documenting. I've been surviving. The documentation was just insurance. She smiled thinly. Insurance I hoped I would never need to use. But then you came along, Derek. You and your certainty that no one would ever hold you accountable. That's not admissible. None of it. You're a homeless woman with no credibility. Your word against mine. My word, she agreed. Plus photographs. Plus recordings. Plus statements from 14 other witnesses who were willing to talk once they knew someone was actually listening. Recordings. The word hit him like a physical blow. That's illegal. You can't record someone without their consent. In this state, public officials performing their duties in public spaces have no expectation of privacy. She paused. I looked it up. He stared at her. This woman who everyone dismissed. This woman who had been invisible for over a decade. This woman who had been building a case file while the entire department laughed about her behind their hands. Why? He managed. Why go through all this? What do you want? I want exactly what I said I wanted. She leaned forward. For you to be taught a lesson in respect. A lesson in how not to treat others, especially the elderly. Your actions were unacceptable. So this is personal. Everything is personal. That's what you never understood. Every person you humiliated had a name, a history, a life that mattered to someone. You treated them like garbage, and then you went home to your wife and your house and your comfortable life, never once thinking about the damage you left behind. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. And the people you called? Who are they? People who've been waiting a long time for a name to go with the complaints they've been receiving. Anonymous complaints, up until now. From citizens too afraid to identify themselves for fear of retaliation. She smiled. I gave them a name today. Your name. He heard it then. The sound of engines. Multiple vehicles approaching the park from different directions. His instinct was to run, to disappear into the trees and pretend this conversation never happened. But his legs would not move. His body had finally caught up with what his mind was still refusing to accept. He was trapped. Two black SUVs pulled into the park simultaneously, one from the east entrance and one from the west. They parked in AV formation, blocking any easy exit. The doors opened in unison. Men in suits emerged. 4 of them. Moving with the precise coordination of people who had done this many times before. Sanchez scrambled to his feet, his back against the oak tree, his eyes wide. Who are they? Myrtle did not answer. She simply watched as the men approached, her expression calm, almost serene. One of them reached the bench first. He was older than the others. Gray hair. Expensive shoes. The kind of face that appeared in courtrooms and congressional hearings. He removed his hat and nodded to Myrtle with visible respect. Mrs. Bellamy. It's good to see you again. Mrs. Bellamy. Not Myrtle. Not the homeless woman. Mrs. Bellamy, spoken like a title. Sanchez's legs buckled. He caught himself against the tree, barely staying upright. Wait, he said. Who are you people? What is this? The man in the gray suit turned to look at him. His expression held no anger. No contempt. Just a cold, professional assessment. Officer Sanchez, he said. We have quite a bit to discuss. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a thick manila envelope. The kind of envelope that contained official documents. The kind of envelope that changed lives. He extended it toward Sanchez. You might want to look at this before we continue. Sanchez's hand trembled as he reached for the envelope. His fingers fumbled with the clasp. Inside were photographs, statements, transcripts, dates and times and badge numbers. A pattern of abuse stretching back 3 years, documented with devastating precision. And at the top of the first page, a header that made his blood run cold. Office of Police Accountability Formal Investigation File Subject. Officer Derek Sanchez Complainant. Myrtle Bellamy. The papers slipped from his fingers and scattered across the wet ground. He looked at Myrtle. At the old woman he had dismissed as worthless. At the woman who had just ended his career with a single phone call. Who are you? He whispered. Myrtle rose slowly from the bench, leaning on her cane, her eyes never leaving his face. I'm someone who believes that power should be used to protect people, not to destroy them. She paused. And I'm someone who's been waiting for you to show me exactly who you are. Which you did. Repeatedly. The men in suits moved closer, forming a loose circle around Sanchez. Officer Sanchez, the gray-haired man said, you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it. What would you do if you discovered the person you dismissed as worthless was the one keeping a record of every mistake you ever made? And what do you think happens to Officer Sanchez next? Share your thoughts below. Sanchez dropped to his knees. The wet grass soaked through his jeans instantly, but he did not feel it. He could not feel anything except the crushing weight of those papers scattered around him. Photographs of himself. Transcripts of his own words. A timeline of every cruel moment he thought nobody was watching. The 4 men in suits stood motionless, waiting. They had done this before. They knew the stages. Denial. Anger. Bargaining. They had seen it all. This is a setup, Sanchez said. His voice cracked on the last word. This is entrapment. You can't do this. The gray-haired man, the one who had handed him the envelope, clasped his hands behind his back. Officer Sanchez, everything in that file was gathered through legal means. Public recordings in public spaces. Voluntary witness statements. Official complaints filed through proper channels. He paused. There's no entrapment here. Just documentation. She's homeless. She's nobody. How does she have connections to? He gestured wildly at the SUVs, at the suits, at the entire impossible situation surrounding him. Myrtle had not moved from her spot near the bench. She leaned on her cane, watching him with an expression that held no triumph, no satisfaction, just a quiet patience, like someone watching a storm pass. "Get up," the gray-haired man said, not unkindly. "Standing in wet grass won't change anything." Sanchez did not move. His mind was racing, searching for exits that did not exist. He could claim the recordings were doctored. He could say the witnesses were coerced. He could argue that Myrtle had manipulated the entire situation. But even as he constructed these defenses, he knew they would crumble. The file was too thorough, too detailed. 3 years of behavior documented with the precision of a court case. Because that was exactly what it was. "How long?" he asked, still on his knees. "How long have you been building this?" The question was directed at Myrtle, but it was the gray-haired man who answered. "Mrs. Bellamy contacted our office 18 months ago. She had already compiled significant documentation by then. We've been supplementing her research with our own investigation since. 18 months. A year and a half of surveillance. Of watching him. Of waiting for him to provide enough rope to hang himself. And he had provided it. Eagerly. Repeatedly. With a smile on his face. Sanchez finally stood. His legs felt weak, unreliable. He looked at the other officers in the park, the ones who had arrived with the SUVs. They wore plain clothes, but their bearing was unmistakable. Law enforcement. Just not the kind that answered to his precinct. "Ramirez and Webb," he said suddenly. "They were with me. They saw everything. They'll back me up." "Officers Ramirez and Webb have already been interviewed," the gray-haired man said. "Their statements are included in your file. Page 47, if you're curious." Sanchez's stomach lurched. His partners. His friends. They had given statements. What did they say? That you have a pattern of aggressive behavior toward vulnerable populations. That they've witnessed multiple instances of excessive force. That they reported concerns to supervisors on 3 separate occasions, and those reports were ignored. The ground seemed to tilt beneath him. Ramirez and Webb. They had laughed at his jokes. They had followed his lead. They had stood behind him during every confrontation. And they had been documenting him too. "This can't be happening," he whispered. "It is happening." Myrtle's voice cut through his fog. She had moved closer, though he had not heard her approach. "It's been happening for 3 years. You just never noticed because you never thought anyone was paying attention." He looked at her. Really looked at her. At the lines carved into her face by decades of sun and wind and hardship. At the intelligence in those pale blue eyes. At the steadiness of her hands on that worn cane. "Why me?" he asked. "There are worse cops out there. Cops who've done worse things. Why target me?" "I didn't target you, Derek. You targeted me." She stepped closer. "You decided I was easy. You decided I was safe to humiliate. You decided that no one would care what happened to an old homeless woman in a rundown park." She paused. "You were wrong." A car door slammed. Everyone turned. Another vehicle had arrived. A sedan this time. Department plates. The door opened, and a man in a captain's uniform stepped out. Captain Morrison. Sanchez's direct supervisor. Their eyes met across the park. Morrison's face was gray, his jaw tight. He did not look like a man coming to defend one of his officers. He looked like a man attending a funeral. "Derek," Morrison said quietly, "I think we need to talk." But the gray-haired man stepped forward, blocking the path between them. "Captain Morrison, I appreciate you coming. But Officer Sanchez is now in our custody for questioning. Any conversations with departmental supervisors will need to go through proper channels." Morrison nodded slowly. He looked at Sanchez one last time, and in that look was everything that did not need to be said. "You're on your own." The men in suits moved closer, forming a wall around Sanchez. Not touching him, not restraining him, just making clear that his options had narrowed to one. "Am I under arrest?" Sanchez asked. "Not yet," the gray-haired man replied. "But that depends entirely on the next few hours." In the distance, a siren wailed. Then another. Then a third. Sanchez turned toward the sound, his heart hammering. "Those aren't for you," the gray-haired man said. "But they could be. The question is whether you want to cooperate with our investigation or force us to make this more public than it needs to be." Sanchez looked at Myrtle one final time. At the woman who had destroyed him without ever raising her voice. Without ever throwing a punch. Without ever doing anything except sitting on a bench and waiting for him to reveal exactly who he was. "I don't understand," he said. "I still don't understand who you are." Myrtle smiled. It was a sad smile. The smile of someone who had seen too much to take pleasure in another person's downfall. "I'm exactly who I told you I was, Derek. An old woman on a bench. You just never asked what I was doing there." The men in suits guided him toward one of the SUVs. He did not resist. There was nothing left to resist with. As the door closed behind him, he caught one last glimpse of Myrtle through the tinted window. She had already turned away. She was walking back to her bench, settling into her usual spot, her cane resting against her leg. Like nothing had happened. Like she had not just ended a man's career with a single phone call. The SUV pulled away, and Jefferson Park grew smaller in the rear window until it disappeared entirely. The black SUV rolled to a stop outside a building Sanchez had never seen before. Gray concrete. No signs. Windows that reflected the sky like mirrors. The kind of building that existed on no maps and answered to no public directory. One of the suited men opened his door from the outside. "This way, Officer Sanchez." He stepped out on legs that still felt unsteady. The parking lot was empty except for their two vehicles. No other cars. No pedestrians. No witnesses. They led him through a side entrance, down a hallway lit by fluorescent tubes, and into a room with a single table and two chairs. The walls were bare. A camera mounted in the corner blinked red. "Have a seat." He sat. The gray-haired man entered behind him, closing the door with a soft click. He took the chair across the table, setting a fresh folder between them. "Do you know who I am, Officer Sanchez?" "No. My name is Raymond Cross. I'm the director of the Office of Police Accountability. We investigate allegations of misconduct against law enforcement officers throughout the state." Director. Not an investigator. Not an assistant. The man running the entire operation. Sanchez's throat tightened. "Why is the director personally involved in my case?" "Because Mrs. Bellamy asked for me specifically." Cross opened the folder. "She and I have a history." "What kind of history?" Cross looked up from the papers. His eyes were sharp, assessing. 23 years ago, Myrtle Bellamy was a civil rights attorney. One of the best in the state. She specialized in police misconduct cases. Won more settlements than anyone in her firm's history. The words hit Sanchez like a physical blow. A lawyer. She was a lawyer. She retired early, Cross continued. Personal reasons. Lost her husband. Lost her home in the aftermath. Some people thought she had given up. Disappeared from public life entirely. He paused. But she didn't give up. She just changed her approach. Changed how? Instead of fighting cases in courtrooms, she started documenting them from the inside. Living among the populations most vulnerable to police abuse. Watching. Listening. Building files that no defense attorney could dismiss. Sanchez's mind reeled. 11 years on that bench. 11 years of watching. Of documenting. Of building cases against officers who thought they were untouchable. "How many?" he asked. "How many officers has she taken down?" Cross smiled thinly. "You're number 14. 14. 14 careers ended by an old woman on a park bench. The others," Sanchez said. "What happened to them?" "Some resigned before charges were filed. Some faced criminal prosecution. 2 are currently serving prison sentences." Cross leaned forward. "The question is which category you fall into." Sanchez stared at the folder, at the evidence that would determine the rest of his life. What do you want from me? The truth. About your actions. About the culture that enabled them. About the supervisors who looked the other way. Cross tapped the folder. You're not the only problem in your precinct, Officer Sanchez. You're just the one we caught first. An opportunity. He was being offered an opportunity. Cooperate. Name names. Turn on the people who had protected him for years. And if I do that? Then we recommend leniency in your case. Administrative penalties rather than criminal charges. Loss of your badge but not your freedom. Sanchez thought about Ramirez and Webb, about Morrison, about all the officers who had laughed at his jokes and watched him cross lines without saying a word. They had already given statements against him. They were already protecting themselves. Why should he protect them? I want it in writing, he said. Whatever deal you're offering. I want it documented. Cross nodded slowly. That can be arranged. He pressed a button on the table. The door opened, and another suited man entered carrying a laptop. We'll record your statement, Cross said. Every name. Every incident. Everything you witnessed during your time on the force. Sanchez looked at the camera in the corner. At the laptop being set up to capture his words. At the folder full of evidence that had brought him to this room. He thought about Myrtle. About the woman he had dismissed as worthless. About the lawyer who had given up her career, her home, her comfortable life, to spend 11 years on a park bench waiting for men like him to reveal themselves. She had beaten him. Completely. Utterly. Without ever raising a fist. Where do you want me to start? He asked. Cross smiled. The beginning. 3 hours later, Sanchez had named 17 officers. 4 supervisors. 1 deputy chief. His throat was raw. His eyes burned. But the laptop had recorded every word, and the deal had been signed, and his badge now sat on the table between them like a discarded toy. Cross gathered his papers and stood. One more thing, Officer Sanchez. What? Mrs. Bellamy wanted me to give you a message. Sanchez looked up. She said to tell you that respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn. And the people you dismissed as worthless were the same people keeping score. The door opened. The suited men returned. We'll escort you to central booking now, Cross said. Processing will take a few hours. After that, you'll be free to go home while you await the formal hearing. Free. The word felt hollow. He would never be free of this. Never be free of the photographs and transcripts and witness statements. Never be free of the knowledge that he had been taken down by someone he never saw coming. As they led him down the hallway, one of the suited men spoke quietly. For what it's worth, you're not the worst we've seen. Is that supposed to make me feel better? No. Just perspective. They emerged into the parking lot. The gray sky had darkened further, and the first drops of rain were beginning to fall. Sanchez tilted his face toward the sky and let the water hit his skin. Somewhere across the city, Myrtle Bellamy was sitting on her bench, watching the rain come down, waiting for the next officer to reveal himself. And somewhere in a precinct he would never return to, his colleagues were learning that their names had been added to a very different kind of list. The handcuffs clicked around his wrists at 4:47 in the afternoon. Not in the gray building. Not in the parking lot. In the lobby of his own precinct, in front of every officer he had worked beside for the past 3 years. They had let him believe he was going home. Let him believe the deal meant he would avoid this particular humiliation. Then they walked him through the front doors of the station and arrested him in full view of everyone. Derek Sanchez, you are under arrest for official misconduct, civil rights violations, and filing false reports. The officer reading him his rights was someone he had trained. A rookie named Patterson who used to bring him coffee. Patterson would not look him in the eye. The bullpen had gone silent. Every conversation stopped. Every keyboard went quiet. Officers stood at their desks, watching the scene unfold with expressions that ranged from shock to satisfaction. Ramirez stood near the water cooler, his face pale. Webb sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen like it contained the secrets of the universe. Neither of them moved to help. This is wrong, Sanchez said, his voice echoing off the walls. I cooperated. I gave them everything they wanted. Patterson continued reading the rights without pause. His hands were steady on the cuffs. His voice was flat, professional. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Captain Morrison emerged from his office. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the arrest with an expression Sanchez could not read. Morrison, Sanchez called out. Tell them this is a mistake. Tell them about the deal. Morrison said nothing. Captain, please. Still nothing. Patterson guided him toward the exit, one hand on his elbow. The eyes of the entire precinct followed them. Some officers looked away. Others watched with undisguised interest, like spectators at a traffic accident. Wait, Sanchez said. Just wait. Patterson paused. This is retaliation. That's what this is. The old woman in the park, she orchestrated all of this. She's been watching me for months. Planning this. That's for your attorney to argue, Patterson said quietly. Listen to me. I'm not the only one. Ramirez, Webb, all of them. They did the same things I did. They watched me do it and never said a word. Patterson's grip tightened slightly on his elbow. I said that's for your attorney to argue. They moved through the exit doors and into the parking lot. A patrol car waited, lights off, doors open. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still wet, and Sanchez's shoes squelched against the pavement. I was told I wouldn't be processed criminally, Sanchez said. That was the deal. Cooperation for leniency. Patterson opened the back door of the patrol car. The deal was with the Office of Police Accountability. This arrest is from the DA's office. Different jurisdiction. He paused. The D decided your cooperation didn't outweigh the severity of the charges. Different jurisdiction. The words sank in slowly. Cross had made a deal. The DA had refused to honor it. Two branches of the system working at cross purposes, and Sanchez was caught in the gap between them. This isn't fair. Patterson's eyes finally met his. Something flickered there. Not sympathy exactly. More like recognition. You threw a 72-year-old man off a bench. You crushed a woman's glasses under your boot. You threatened to arrest a child. He shook his head. You want to talk about what's fair? Sanchez had no response. Patterson guided him into the back seat, one hand on top of his head to prevent him from hitting the door frame. The same gesture Sanchez had performed hundreds of times. The same casual control he had exercised over countless suspects. Now he was on the other side. The door closed. The interior smelled like sweat and fear and disinfectant. A metal grate separated him from the front seats. Through the window, he watched Patterson walk around to the driver's side. The car started. The lot slid past. The precinct building shrank in the rear window until it was just another structure on another street in a city that had already begun to forget him. At central booking, they took his fingerprints, his photograph, his shoelaces and belt. They assigned him a number and a cell and a court date 3 weeks away. The cell was small. Gray walls, metal toilet, bunk with a thin mattress that smelled of mildew. Through the narrow window, he could see a slice of sky turning orange as the sun began to set. He thought about Myrtle on her bench, watching that same sunset. He thought about the envelope full of evidence, the photographs and transcripts and witness statements. He thought about all the people he had humiliated, harassed, and hurt over the past 3 years. People whose names he never bothered to learn. People whose faces he could barely remember. They were out there somewhere, living their lives, surviving despite everything he had done to make their survival harder. And he was in here, behind bars. His career over. His reputation destroyed. His future reduced to court dates and legal fees and the long, slow process of accountability. The cell door clanged shut behind the guard. Sanchez sat on the edge of the bunk, his head in his hands. For the first time in 3 years, he was the one who was invisible. The one the world had decided to forget. The one trapped in a system designed to grind people down until there was nothing left. Now he understood. Now, finally, he understood what it felt like. But understanding came too late to change anything. The file was closed. The arrest was made. The consequences were already in motion. And somewhere across the city, an old woman sat on a park bench, watching the last light fade from the sky, waiting for the next name to add to her list. The news vans arrived at Jefferson Park at 7:15 the next morning. Myrtle watched them set up from her bench, their satellite dishes unfolding like metal flowers. Reporters checked their hair in compact mirrors. Camera operators tested their angles against the golden morning light. The same light that had illuminated her bench for 11 years now illuminated a crime scene. Yellow tape stretched between the oak trees. Evidence markers dotted the cracked pavement where Sanchez had knelt just 24 hours ago. A young woman with a microphone approached the bench cautiously, like she was approaching a wild animal. "Excuse me, are you Myrtle Bellamy?" Myrtle did not look up. "I might be. I'm Hannah Chen with Channel 7 News. Would you be willing to answer a few questions about Officer Sanchez's arrest?" "I already said everything I needed to say to the people who needed to hear it. The public deserves to know your side of the story. How you documented his behavior. How you brought him to justice." Now Myrtle looked up. Her pale blue eyes held no warmth, no invitation. "The public doesn't need to know anything about me. The public needs to know about the 14 other people Officer Sanchez hurt during his time on the force. The public needs to know about the supervisors who ignored complaints. The public needs to know about a system that protects cruelty as long as it wears a badge." Hannah's eyes lit up. This was exactly the kind of quote that led evening broadcasts. "Can I use that? On camera?" "You can use whatever you want. But I'm not doing an interview." "Why not? This is your moment. You exposed a corrupt officer. You're a hero." Myrtle laughed. It was a dry sound, humorless. "A hero? I sat on a bench for 11 years watching people suffer. I wrote down names and dates while officers like Sanchez treated human beings like garbage. I built a file and waited for the right moment to use it." She shook her head. "That's not heroism. That's survival. But you made a difference. You changed things. I removed one officer from one precinct in one city. There are thousands more just like him. Tens of thousands." She picked up her coffee cup and took a long sip. "I didn't change anything. I just moved the needle a fraction of an inch." Hannah opened her mouth to respond, but a commotion near the park entrance drew her attention. More vehicles arriving. More cameras. More microphones. "I have to go," she said. "But if you change your mind about the interview." "I won't." Hannah hurried toward the growing crowd of media, leaving Myrtle alone on her bench. But not for long. Gerald appeared from behind the oak trees, pushing his shopping cart full of aluminum cans. He looked at the news vans, the yellow tape, the reporters jostling for position. "Heard what happened," he said, settling onto the far end of the bench. "The whole park's buzzing about it. The park is always buzzing about something. This is different. You took down a cop, Myrtle. People are calling you a legend. People need better standards for legends." Gerald laughed. "Maybe, but it still means something. To the folks here. To the ones Sanchez hurt." He paused. "Curtis is telling everyone who'll listen about how you got justice for him. Says he's going to name his grandkid after you." Myrtle's expression softened slightly. "He doesn't have a grandkid. Says he's going to adopt one just so he can do it." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the media circus from a distance. A helicopter appeared overhead, circling the park like a mechanical vulture. "What happens now?" Gerald asked. "You gonna keep doing this? Finding cops, building cases?" "I don't know." Myrtle's voice was quiet, reflective. "I've been doing this for so long, I'm not sure what else there is. You could rest. You've earned it." "Rest." She repeated the word like she was tasting something unfamiliar. "I'm not sure I remember how." The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the fog. The park began filling with people drawn by the news coverage. Some of them were homeless residents who had witnessed Sanchez's behavior firsthand. Others were curious onlookers. A few were officers from neighboring precincts, watching the scene with expressions that mixed concern and calculation. A woman in a business suit broke away from the media crowd and walked toward the bench. She moved with purpose, her heels clicking against the pavement. "Mrs. Bellamy?" Myrtle looked up. "My name is Diane Torres. I'm an attorney with the ACLU. We'd like to discuss your documentation methods. What you've built here could serve as a model for civilian oversight nationwide. I'm not interested in being a model. This isn't about you. It's about the system. About creating accountability where none exists. Diane sat on the bench without being invited. The work you've done could save lives. Could prevent officers like Sanchez from ever getting a badge in the first place. Myrtle studied her. This woman with her expensive suit and her business cards and her organization full of resources. You want my files? We want to learn from your methods. To replicate them. To train others to do what you've done. What I've done cost me everything. My career. My home. My marriage. Myrtle's voice hardened. You want to train people to give up their lives for the chance to maybe, possibly, hold one bad actor accountable? I want to make sure their sacrifice isn't wasted. Myrtle looked at her for a long moment. Then she reached into her coat and pulled out a small notebook, its pages worn soft by years of handling. This is my index. Names, dates, cross-references. Everything I've documented is organized through this. Diane's eyes widened. I'll share it with your organization. On one condition. Name it. You don't make this about me. No profiles. No awards. No speaking engagements. She pressed the notebook into Diane's hands. The moment this becomes about Myrtle Bellamy, it stops being about the people who actually matter. Diane nodded slowly. You have my word. She stood, clutching the notebook like it was made of gold. Then she paused. Why did you do it? Really? 11 years on a park bench. There had to be an easier way. Myrtle looked out at the park. At the swings moving in the breeze. At the basketball courts where teenagers would gather later. At the broken pavement and scattered trash and all the people who called this place home. Because someone had to watch, she said. And I was already here. Diane nodded once more, then walked back toward the media crowd, the notebook pressed against her chest. Gerald whistled low. You just gave away your life's work. I gave it to someone who might actually use it. Myrtle picked up her cane and stood slowly. That's more than most people can say. She began walking toward the far end of the park, away from the cameras and the questions and the people who wanted to turn her into something she was not. Behind her, the reporters called out, asking for statements, asking for interviews, asking for the story of the homeless woman who had taken down a cop. She did not turn around. 3 weeks later, the park had returned to its ordinary rhythm. The news vans were gone. The yellow tape had been removed. The helicopters had found other stories to circle. Jefferson Park was just a park again, populated by pigeons and joggers and the people who had nowhere else to go. Myrtle sat on her bench at dawn, watching the sun rise over the city skyline. The light painted everything gold and orange, transforming even the trash into something beautiful. She had been here for 11 years, 3 months, and 17 days. Not that she was counting. The numbers just accumulated, the same way the names in her notebook had accumulated, the same way the evidence in her files had accumulated. But the notebook was gone now, passed to Diane Torres and her team of lawyers. The files had been entered into official databases, their contents analyzed and catalogized by people with graduate degrees and office coffee makers. Her work had become part of something larger, something that would continue long after she was gone. The bench felt different without that weight. Lighter somehow. Less purposeful. Gerald had stopped coming by. He had found a room in a shelter downtown, one of the beds that opened up after the media attention forced the city to expand its services. He sent word through the network of park regulars that he was doing okay. That he had a bed and 3 meals and a caseworker who actually returned his calls. Small victories. The kind that never made the evening news. Curtis Williams had testified at Sanchez's preliminary hearing, his voice steady despite his age, his words clear despite the trauma he had endured. The judge had listened. The evidence had been accepted. A trial date had been set for the fall. More small victories. More incremental progress. More proof that the system could work, sometimes, when enough people pushed hard enough. A figure approached from the direction of the playground. Myrtle watched without turning her head, tracking the movement in her peripheral vision. Old habits. The figure was small. A woman in her 20s with dark hair and careful steps. She stopped a few feet from the bench. Is this seat taken? Myrtle looked at her. Really looked. The woman's clothes were worn but clean. Her eyes held the particular wariness of someone who had learned not to trust easily. It's a public bench. The woman sat. Not too close. Not too far. The exact distance that homeless people learn to maintain, close enough for conversation, far enough for escape. I heard about what you did, the woman said. Everyone's talking about it. People talk about a lot of things. They say you took down a cop. Just by watching. Just by writing things down. Myrtle did not respond. I've been watching too, the woman continued. There's an officer in my neighborhood. He does the same things. Harassment. Intimidation. Last week he dumped a man's belongings into the sewer drain. Just because he could. Myrtle turned to look at her directly. What's your name? Rosa. Rosa Mendez. And why are you telling me this, Rosa? Rosa met her gaze without flinching. Because I want to learn. What you did. How you did it. How to build a case that can't be ignored. Myrtle was quiet for a long moment. The sun climbed higher, its warmth spreading across the bench. A pigeon landed near their feet, pecking at something invisible on the pavement. It's not easy, Myrtle said finally. What I did. It takes years. It takes sacrifice. It takes giving up things you never thought you'd have to give up. I know. You'll be dismissed. Ignored. Treated like you don't exist. People will look right through you and never see what you're really doing. I know. And even when you succeed, even when you finally take one of them down, there will be 10 more waiting to take their place. The system doesn't change easily. It fights back. Rosa nodded slowly. I know all of that. I've lived it. She paused. But I also know that doing nothing is worse. Watching them hurt people and just accepting it. Pretending it's not my problem because I'm too tired or too scared or too small to make a difference. Myrtle studied her. This young woman with her careful words and her worn clothes and her eyes that had seen too much already. She saw herself. 23 years ago. Before the law degree. Before the cases. Before the long, slow descent into invisibility. You'll need a notebook, Myrtle said. Rosa's face shifted. Hope flickered there, carefully controlled. What kind? Small. Easy to hide. Water-resistant if you can find one. You'll be writing in all kinds of weather. Myrtle reached into her coat and pulled out a pen. And you'll need one of these. Ink that doesn't run. Rosa took the pen like it was a sacred object. What else? Patience. More patience than you think you have. More patience than you think is possible. Myrtle leaned back against the bench. They will test you. They will try to break you. They will make you believe that none of it matters. How do you get through that? Myrtle looked out at the park. At the swings where children would play later. At the basketball courts where teenagers would gather. At all the small moments of ordinary life happening in the spaces between crises. You remember why you started. Every single day. You remember the names and the faces and the people who are counting on someone to pay attention. She paused. And you remember that power isn't always loud. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is sit quietly and watch. And wait. And write it all down. Rosa nodded slowly, clutching the pen. Will you teach me? The methods. The documentation. How to build something that can't be dismissed. Myrtle was quiet for a long moment. The sun had risen fully now, its light harsh and honest against the park's weathered surfaces. I'll teach you what I know, she said finally. But the rest you'll have to learn yourself. Through watching. Through listening. Through being invisible long enough to see what people do when they think no one is paying attention. Rosa's hand found the pen's cap, clicking it open and closed in a nervous rhythm. When do we start? Myrtle smiled. It was a small smile. Tired, but real. We already have. They sat together on the bench as the morning unfolded around them. 2 women. One old, one young. Both invisible to the joggers and dogwalkers and ordinary citizens passing by. But they were watching. They were always watching. And somewhere in this city, in 1,000 cities just like it, There were officers who had not yet learned the lesson that Derek Sanchez had learned too late. Respect is not demanded. It is revealed when cruelty overreaches. And the people you dismiss as worthless are the same people keeping score. Thank you for staying with me through Myrtle's story. If this touched you, if it made you think about who we overlook and why, then hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another story that challenges what you thought you knew. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below and tell me what you would do if you had Myrtle's patience and Rose's courage. These stories matter. Your voice matters. And together, we can prove that the ones who endure are the ones who change everything.